parts, folks, because we've got an hour and a half together. So don't despair, I won't be speaking all that time. We'll have opportunities for discussion amongst yourselves, some questions and discussion with me, I hope. Two parts. First of all, I want to spend half an hour or so on the theme of the conference to contextualise where I want to go over the next 3 days. The general title for this address, which the first half of the address will not have anything to do with, is called Dangerous Ideas, Why Private Religion is Bad News for the Good News in Australia. Dangerous Ideas, Why Private Religion is Bad News for the Good News in Australia. But to put that in context, I want to spend some time on the theme of the conference and how the issue of dangerous ideas is connected to that. So, for the first part, I want to set the scene. And in a general sense, I want to suggest to you that the praise of God is the natural response to God's abundant life. And so it was quite a joy to me this morning as we began the morning prayer to begin singing. Sing praise, all you peoples, sing praises to the Lord. The praise of God is the natural response to the abundant life in Christ Jesus. So to our theme, life in abundance. These words of John's Gospel, I have come that you may have life and have it in all its abundance, have resonated in my own life. And the older I get, the more I cherish the life that I have. Particularly in the context of many that do not have such a life. Many have never had a chance. Some have had this life snatched away from them. Some never get a chance to flourish with the kind of abundant life that Jesus promised. And it is not any old life that Jesus speaks of, but rather the fullness of life. It's a lovely Greek word, pleroma. I have come that you may have life, not an ordinary life, but a fullness of life. The abundance of life. A matter of quality before a matter of quantity. So, my friends, you can imagine how absolutely full of admiration I was for the organisers of this conference. Because there I was on the freeway coming, on the Tullamarine freeway on Tuesday coming in to Melbourne, and there on a big billboard, I thought, good heavens, they've even paid for the conference to be advertised on the Tullamarine freeway. It's let life in. I thought it's not quite life in abundance, but let life in. I thought that's it. The trouble is, it's for the new Holden Cascade. Not quite the same thing. Let life in. Let the life of Jesus in. You can have that, or you can have a new Holden Cascade. They did a study recently on the things that make for happiness. And apparently, no surprises, it wasn't money and great wealth, and it wasn't material possessions, it was the quality of one's relationships that made for true happiness and longevity. Life in abundance is not prosperity gospel, but it is the power for living in the life that we've been given with hope. And this is a great challenge in our world today. So, I have come that you may have life and have it in all its abundance is a very poignant location for the question of mission and evangelism. The second thing about this conference theme is that the abundance of life is something for receiving. It's given to be received. To all who received him, to all who called upon his name, he gave power to become children of God. God's life has to be appropriated. And this is a challenge for us. But why is it a challenge to receive this life? You might think, well, because we're feeble and weak, at times appallingly bad in our words and behaviour, the sin that clings so closely continually disrupts our lives and others. These are all reasons why perhaps people might say, life in abundance is not for me, I can't, I've tried, it doesn't work, I've got other problems. But I want to suggest to you that the reason why it is so difficult to receive this life is not because of us, but because of the fulsomeness, the plurality of God. We take our cup to receive, and there is a veritable waterfall. It's too much. It's too much. The pleroma of God. God is a God of excess. There's a surplus, an unfinished quantity and quality. It can't be all drunk at once. The appropriation, well, some say the first 100 years are the most difficult. And so, the theme, Life in Abundance, an Anglican conference on mission and evangelism. How then shall we live in relation to this abundant life, which is almost too much and overwhelming? So I want to suggest to you, in the first part of this address, that the praise of God is our natural response to life in the abundance of God. The praise of God. The very centre and heart of our response to God's call into abundant life is to offer our praise. To live thankfully, with gratitude in our hearts and upon our lips. Surely this is a great challenge. Bonhoeffer said there was no cheap discipleship, and there's no cheap praise. It's hard won. Through the sufferings and the pains and the tribulations and the foolishness of this world, a praise has to be found if God is to be God and we are to be God's children. Certainly, as I look back on my life, this has been my experience. Over 40 years ago, as a young man, very, very confused and broken for many years. Certainly felt an emotional cripple because of some things in my life. There was no praise on my lips. It was not possible. Not from the darkest places, you would think. And then the remarkable train of events and experience of hearing God's call, the still small voice. An invitation to begin to offer praise. I remember somebody once said to me at that time, well, Stephen, you know, you really need to learn to praise God. To which my response was, well, what for? There's nothing. I can't see it. And then a gift is given at the bottom of the well, so to speak, but you don't manufacture it yourself. It is a gift. And it has to be appropriated by faith, but even faith becomes a gift. It's not self-generated, the praise of God. And we have many feverish attempts to generate praise, and they fall flat, or they don't sustain us. They're sugar-coated, if you like, they're full of carbohydrates, but there's no protein in them. We want slow-release praise, which is good for the long haul. So finally, giving up on the attempt to manufacture and well up from within me any form of thanks to God, I discovered that the human heart is, as I say, not self-generated in praise, but it comes as a gift. The deepest mystery of our life is surely the life of God within us. And only in the last couple of days I read a prayer which has echoes from Romans chapter 8. It says God's Spirit joins with our spirit to tell us that we are God's children. I think I'll be working on that one for the next while. God's Spirit joins with our spirit to tell us we are God's children. And it is in that joining that the true praise of God can find its seed. So I have come to appreciate the praise tradition in the Christian church. A praise born in and through suffering. It's not inconsequential that the origins of Pentecostalism in the modern period begin at a place, Azusa Street. A place great suffering for a race that had been underprivileged and marginalised. Out of that suffering, a remarkable praise was found. To live for God's praise seems to be deeply encoded in our tradition and in our lives as human beings. One author says it so beautifully. Christians know, if not by instinct, then certainly through their spiritual formation, that praise lies at the heart of their identity. And so praise may be said to be the human reflex to the outflow of God's love. Perhaps no better expressed than the Song of Mary, "My soul praises the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Saviour, for God has been mindful of the humble state of his servant." And in the tradition, of course, St. Augustine echoes this same theme. Can any praise be worthy of the Lord's majesty? How magnificent is God's strength? How inscrutable God's wisdom? We are one of your creatures, Lord, and our instinct is to praise you. We bear about us the mark of death, the sign of our own sin, to remind us that you thwart the proud. And still, since we are part of your creation, we wish to praise you. The thought of you stirs us so deeply that we cannot be content unless we praise you, because you made us for yourself and our hearts are restless till they find their rest in you. How many times have you heard that in your life? And it still rings true and digs deep, because the seed of praise is DNA encoded insofar as we are God's children and bear God's image. A little bit further in the tradition, we have wonderful poetry of George Herbert. And here we go. Lord, let the angels praise thy name. Man is a foolish thing, a foolish thing. Folly and sin play all his game. His house still burns, and yet he doth sing. Man is but grass, he knows it. Fill the glass. But then he finishes. As dirty hands foul all they touch, and those things most which are most pure and fine, so our clay hearts, even when we crouch to sing thy praises, make them less divine. Yet either this or none thy portion is. There's a magical last couple of lines there. Human beings, in our frailty and our feebleness and our poverty, even when we kneel in obeisance and awe and wonder at the Almighty God to give thanks for the abundant life, our clay hearts, even when we crouch to sing thy praises, we still make them less divine. There's a contaminant, it seems, because of who we are. Our praise is always a stammering, stuttering kind of praise, faltering praise. But then Herbert reveals the secret. Yet, God, it's this or nothing. This is as good as it gets. Yet either this or none, it should be thy portion is. It will be good enough, because God's Spirit joins with our spirit. And then in another poem of his, Gratefulness, he ends his poem thus: Thou hast given so much to me. Give one thing more, a grateful heart. Not thankful when it pleaseth me, as if thy blessings had spare days, but such a heart whose pulse is thy praise. It's a beautiful poem. But such a heart whose pulse is the praise of God. Well, we can update this perhaps one more time. Probably the greatest theologian of the 20th century, Karl Barth, spent every morning listening to Mozart. That's a very good thing to do anyway. So. His wife came in on his 86th birthday. He died listening to Mozart. And so he wrote some wonderful appreciations of Mozart's theology. And he said this of Mozart. Mozart does not will to proclaim the praise of God. He does not will it. He just does it. Precisely in that humility in which he himself is, so to speak, only the instrument, with which he allows us to hear what he hears, what surges him from God's creation, what rises in him, and must proceed from him. It's remarkable. He sees in Mozart's music, and of course there are many other places, but Mozart's a good place for art. He does not will to praise God. It's not self-manufactured. It's not self-generated. He just does it. It surges within. It must come out. And Bach, of course, got this right because he said the first and the special ministry of the Christian community is to offer praise of God. He then had some rather unkind words to say about organs. But he was not an Anglican, and he didn't appreciate Anglican liturgical life nor the organ. As a matter of fact, he complained, and I wished I brought the quote now. He said, the trouble with organs is that they, and I know there's a lot of organ scholars and lovers here, so please take this in as Bart. I didn't say this, Bart said. He said, the trouble with organs is they muffle, they don't let you know how poorly people are really singing. It protects the people from their feebleness of their song. The 19th century German poet Rainer Rilke sums it up. To praise is the whole thing. Well, this is almost the end of the first part. The praise of God is the natural response to the life of abundance in Christ Jesus. So, mission and evangelism. I suggest to you that certainly the way I have found to understand mission and evangelism best is to see these things as the horizontal dimension of our praise of God. When I first began teaching in 1991 at United Theological College, the advertisement in the paper said that they wanted someone to teach systematic theology and evangelism. And this was an unusual combo, I tell you. So my theological mentor said, "Why do you want to do that? You don't teach evangelism. You're going to teach dogmatics." And every part of me was saying, "Yeah, well, I really love that." And of course the evangelists were saying, "We don't want any theology in here, thanks. All that does is just contaminate the ship." And I thought, great, I think I'll offend both people at the same time. I'll see if I can get this job. And I started developing courses on evangelism and mission, but hopefully with some understanding of the theological tradition. And it was in that context that I first started connecting with my very important theological mentors who spoke about praise-centered evangelism. Now, you can of course take this in many ways. It's not an invitation for a kind of clappy, happy type of evangelism, although I like to be happy and I like to clap. A praise-centered evangelism, in the light of what I've been saying about the nature of praise, out of both the tragedies of life as well as the joy. A praise-centered evangelism. And in that context, I was struck with the comment of the author Thomas Mann in his novel Joseph and His Brothers. And in this novel, Jacob is said at the end of his life to be talking about his wife Rachel. Jacob talking about his wife Rachel, and Thomas Mann said of him, "Anyhow, he simply loved to speak of her, even when there was no point at all, just as he loved to speak of God." He simply loved to speak of her, even when there was no point at all, just as he loved to speak of God. Like Mozart, who does not will to proclaim the praise of God, he just doesn't. Now, definitions are dangerous. They usually fall victim to 1,000 qualifications, but nonetheless I fall into that trap now. Here's mine on evangelism, and it's not just mine. I filched it and plundered it from another who I thought really got it right. Evangelism. Remember, evangelism and mission, the horizontal dimension of our praise. Evangelism, the content of praise, repeated and explained to others so that they may join the community of Jesus Christ. The content of praise, repeated and explained to others so that they may join the community of Jesus Christ. Two things about that. First, the substance of our praise is Jesus Christ, the crucified Lord of glory. And second, we are a storytelling people. Repeated and explained to others that they may join the community of Jesus Christ. We have to tell a story. It has to be our story of the praise of God, not somebody else's story, our story. It's a lovely text in the letter to the Ephesians, which occupied my thinking for many years. Pray for me, says the writer, pray for me, that whenever I open my mouth, words may be given me, so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel. In other words, without restraint. He loved to speak of her, even when there was no point at all, just as he liked to speak of God. Whenever I open my mouth, words may be given me, so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel. Chapter 6, verse 9 of Ephesians. And of course, there's another definition of evangelism. It's one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. World Council of Churches some years ago. And mission. Well, we know about the 5 marks of mission, don't we? Where are they? Here they are. No, that's going off. We have one here. These are the 5 marks which you know. You like the scriptures. You must read, learn, mark, and inwardly digest the 5 marks of mission before breakfast every day. Missio, from the Latin missio, mittere, sent. 5 marks of mission. The sentness of the people of God. This is what it looks like. What does mission look like? These 5 marks are a wonderful way of capturing them. Well, I want to finish up this introductory session on life in abundance. Praise is our natural response. And I'd like to invite you for 5 minutes or so to respond with your conversations to your neighbour, 2 or 3, that's all. Take 5 minutes and what you've been thinking about as I've been speaking. An opportunity to share it with your next door neighbour about this life in abundance and the praise of God. Because this word praise triggers off all sorts of thoughts. And it sends hairs in all different directions. I don't want any of that stuff. I've seen what that looks like. I'm in the business of the recovery of language and the reclaiming of the language at the heart of our tradition. And I'm in the business of a reclaiming of it for what I call a broad church Anglicanism. This language is not owned by any particular part of the church or the churches. This is the language of God. And so there is a responsibility for us to recover this language and explore it and put flesh on it. So I invite you to spend 5 minutes having a conversation with your neighbour about that. Off you go. So to the second part. What's a dangerous idea? A dangerous idea, and I mean a genuinely dangerous idea. There is the Sydney Festival of Dangerous Ideas. Somebody, you may have been to it. Anybody been to the Festival of Dangerous Ideas? Somebody said to me very kindly, well, it's actually the Festival of Predictable Ideas. Now, I mean a genuinely dangerous idea that will generate violence and undermine that which is good. A dangerous idea. What would be a dangerous idea in relation to life in abundance and the praise of God? It would be an idea which threatens the praise of God, which diminishes the praise of God, which distorts the praise of God. That would be a dangerous idea. Now, I want to propose to you in the second part, which is really, in the first address, something of the context in which the praise of God has to emerge in the Australian context, in our context, what threatens the praise of God? What diminishes the abundant life that we are given and receive with praise and thanks? And I'm really going to invite you today to take away from this session some thoughts about, well, what other dangerous ideas? I'm just going to suggest one. But really, I hope that you can start mulling over and chewing over what you would consider some dangerous ideas too. So the second part of this talk is more by way of invitation for you to begin your own thinking. I'm suggesting that private religion is a dangerous idea because it threatens the praise of God. And it threatens in some particular ways. Particularly, it distorts the praise of God. It corrals the praise of God and it cages it. And ultimately, it evaporates it. And so, the more expanded title is Why Private Religion is Bad News for the Good News. So I want to spend some time on dangerous ideas and the nature of the privatisation of faith today and religion in general. And then in the final conclusion, I want to offer some responses. And to begin, I want to bring back to your attention this remarkable and helpful quote by the Jewish writer Abraham Heschel. Our culture, he writes, finds it easy to convey resentments, but hard to communicate praise. We have nearly lost the art of conveying to our children our power to praise, our ability to cherish the things that cannot be quantified. Such a poignant, insightful comment on our, particularly our Western condition. Easy to convey resentments, hard to communicate praise, to cherish the things that cannot be quantified. So to dangerous ideas. Psychologists identify dangerous ideas as those ideas that propel people and groups into great conflict. And two psychologists, authors of an article I found on dangerous ideas, say this: the toll in death, suffering and displacement caused by conflicts engaging groups defined by ethnicity, nationality, religion or other social identities has reached staggering proportions over the past decade. With expertise in research and intervention, psychologists have critical contributions to make to more fully understanding and more effectively confronting this distressing global phenomenon. And they observe that there is perhaps no more dangerous force in social relations than the human mind. People's capacities to categorise, interpret, and go beyond the information given readily lead to the stereotyping and dehumanisation that escalate and entrench group conflict. These same people identify 5 belief domains which are dangerous ideas: superiority, injustice, vulnerability, distrust, and helplessness. These are, they say, particularly important areas conducive to dangerous ideas. For example, the idea of superiority of certain ethnic, cultural or religious groups, that they are superior to others, would be an example of a dangerous idea that generates significant conflict today. As I pondered the phenomenon of dangerous ideas and wondered how that might provide a clue to the theme of this conference, my concern about recovering a true praise of God in the church and the public spaces of society started to gel. At one level, ideas that generate violent conflict are dangerous. Why? The spirit of praise is replaced by the spirit of war and hate. Might there not be some ideas that are dangerous because they undermine or destroy the possibility of genuine praise of God today? In other words, dangerous because they empty life rather than make for its abundance. And with that in mind, I wondered whether, first of all, religion itself might be a dangerous idea. So, a question, is religion a dangerous idea? Well, there's no shortage of contemporary atheists who argue that religion per se is a dangerous idea. Why? They offer various reasons. Religion following Marx is an opiate of the people, generating a false consciousness and undermining the empowerment of oppressed people. Or perhaps we take the 19th century philosopher Feuerbach and his approach whereby religion refers to a divine being or beings that is a consequence of human projection. This reduction of religion is perhaps the most powerful force affecting attitudes in the last 2 centuries and underlines the contemporary atheist position. Perhaps most significantly in our present context is the view that religion is dangerous because it causes violence. This is extremely common in the popular press. I want to briefly consider this proposal because it is such a key and powerful driver today of people's views and why we don't want religion in the public space. It seems to have an aura of suspicion over any authentic voice of praise. So, religion is dangerous because it causes violence. As I said, this is a popular point of view and one that is stubbornly resistant to change and extremely dangerous. A wonderful book, Fields of Blood, Religion and the History of Violence by well-known author Karen Armstrong. She states this: in the West, the idea that religion is inherently violent is now taken for granted and seems self-evident. She continues, as one who speaks on religion, I constantly hear how cruel and aggressive religion has been, a view that eerily is expressed in the same way almost every time. Religion has been the cause of all the major wars in history, you hear. Armstrong notes that it is an odd remark. Obviously, the 2 world wars were not fought on account of religion. She goes on to state, yet so indelible is the aggressive image of religious faith in our secular consciousness that we routinely load the violent sins of the 20th century on the back of religion, and we drive it out into the political wilderness. Armstrong argues that modern society has made a scapegoat of faith. She goes on to note that even those who admit that religion has not been responsible for all violence and warfare of the human race still take its essential belligerence for granted. The claim is usually related to monotheistic religions, for once people believe that God is on their side, compromise becomes impossible. You can't help but sympathise with this view, can you? And of course, she says it is easy to recite a long list of events that seem to support this. The Crusades, the wars of religion of the 16th and 17th century, more recent terrorism committed in the name of religion. Armstrong argues that religion is neither inherently violent nor the cause of violence. On the other hand, she does not shirk away from showing how the actual history of religion has at times been complicit in, and in some cases a driver for violence. And of course, as the Australian Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse in our public institutions, including the church, has made quite clear the link between religion and violence has good empirical evidence in some respects and some significant traction in the wider community. Armstrong states at the end of her book, we have seen that, like the weather, religion does a lot of different things. To claim that it has a single, unchanging and inherently violent essence is not accurate. Identical religious beliefs and practices have inspired diametrically opposed courses of action. Armstrong's tour de force of the subject is worth a read, and so is another recent book by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, a respected leader, philosopher, author and social commentator who has been described as Britain's most authentically prophetic voice. I recommend you get his book, Not in God's Name, Confronting Religious Violence, 2015. Not in God's Name, Confronting Religious Violence. A remarkable read. Like Armstrong, Sacks argues that religion is not the cause of violence. However, he does not shy away from some of the brute realities of life that impact all people, whether religious or not religious. There's much more that could be said about this, but I wanted to first of all flag that it is said religion is a dangerous idea because it generates violence. So maybe religion is dangerous because it is a primary contributor to violence. Maybe the religious impulse referred to by St. Augustine earlier, the thought of you stirs us so deeply that we cannot be content until we praise you. Maybe that impulse is false or misplaced. Maybe the deeper impulse has its energy in violence, not praise. Of course, there is an alternative view emerging that argues that religion is not the cause of violence, but in fact, violence is the cause of religion, and that as a result, religion is the solution to violence. We don't have time to pursue this, but it's a very important development in recent anthropology and theology. One thing is for sure, preoccupation with the relationship between religion and violence can distract us from what might be the most dangerous idea we have to reckon with in relation to the subject of this conference. And so I get to the heart of the matter, if you like. Not religion per se, but its privatisation is a dangerous idea. All I have said so far has traded on the fact that we all assume we know what religion is. In the West, we see religion as a coherent system of obligatory beliefs, institutions and rituals, centering on a supernatural God whose practice is essentially private and hermetically sealed off from secular activities. In other cultures and through the ages, the idea of religion has never been reduced to beliefs and practices separated off from the rest of life. But that notion of religion, the separation, the privatisation of faith, is an invention of the West. The Latin word religio means obligations. To say that something was religio meant it was incumbent upon you to do it, whether it was a cultic observance, keeping an oath, or etc. Religio was that which was binding. That which was binding. St. Augustine gave this a slightly new twist by relating religio to the binding that occurred between God and people and with each other. And in medieval Europe, the religio came to mean the monastic life, with its quite particular obligations for the monk, compared to the secular priest who worked in the world. In the pre-modern period, religion permeated all aspects of life. It could not be cordoned off in some private sphere. Ancient people would have found it impossible to see where religion ended and politics began. As Karen Armstrong notes, they wanted to invest everything they did with ultimate value. Why? Because, she said, we are meaning-seeking creatures. We have to make sense of our world. And the notion of different silos for different parts does not make sense of the meaning, the quest for meaning. The notion of religion as something separate from public life arose in the wake of the 16th century Reformation and the so-called wars of religion in the 17th century. And the Englishman John Locke gave voice to the modern Western notion of religion. Locke, because he was a peace-loving character, argued that religion was a private search and as such could not be policed by the government. Government should be kept out of religion. In this personal quest, everyone, he said, must rely on their own endeavours rather than an external authority. To mingle religion and politics was a grievous, dangerous and existential error. So I have this quote from Locke. The church, he said, in itself is a thing absolutely separate and distinct from the Commonwealth. The boundaries on both sides are fixed and immovable. He jumbles heaven and earth together, the things most remote and opposite, who mixes two societies, which are in their original end, business, and in everything, perfectly and infinitely different from each other. He assumed that the separation of religion and politics was inherent in the nature of things. He argued that because of the violent passions it supposedly unleashed, Locke insisted that the separation or the segregation of religion from government was above all things necessary for the creation of a peaceful society. This late 17th century England was the period of quest for toleration, a much debased word these days. Peace, a tolerant society. In other words, keep religion out of government. Keep government out of religion. Separate the church from the state. Karen Armstrong concludes, in John Locke we see the birth of the myth of religious violence that would become ingrained in the Western ethos. Society is maintained in peace and balance and harmony when religion is kept in the private domain. Now, Armstrong is not the only voice. She's not alone in this assessment. The leading American Catholic theologian William Kavanagh, in his remarkable book, The Myth of Religious Violence, discusses the invention of religion and the creation myth of the wars of religion. He argues that the separation of religion from political life on the pretext of its inherent violence serves a dark purpose. Not only, he said, does it provide the foundation for the sovereign nation state to separate religion from government, at the same time it provides a mask for violence perpetrated by sovereign states. If it is religion that is prone to violence, then whatever violent action is sanctioned by the nation state will be more easily justified as an act necessary for the protection and survival of the people. We hear echoes of this all over the place today in the West in particular. State-sanctioned violence will only ever be consequentially violent. It is not inherent, he said, to the character of the state as such. So the argument goes. Controversial, perhaps, but let history be the arbiter. As Kavanagh shows, attempts to separate religious violence from secular violence are incoherent. It's all in the mix, so to speak. So separating religion from the nation state is one thing, but the real problem arises when the nation state claims the public space and religion is relegated to the private realm. That's the real issue. Not the separation as such, that has its difficulties, but the privatisation of religion, the separation from the public space. This is a common assumption and a perception about religion in a secular liberal democracy. Religion is a private matter. It is passé. It is irrational. It is essentially finished. If you have any doubt about this, it was reported today the chief of the CSIRO said the politics of climate are more like religion than science. I was minding my own business watching ABC 24 at 7:30 this morning. The politics of religion, politics of climate are more like religion than science. Emotional, irrational. Get over it. That's frightening. But it's part of the course. Because we are a liberal society, we tolerate religion, as long as it remains where it belongs. There is another dangerous dimension to this. By locating religion in the private sphere, we become blind to the deeper reality that, as Kavanagh said, a nation state has in effect become another religion. In other words, a total way of life through which our everyday world is ordered. It matters not whether it's nationalism, capitalism, Marxism, liberalism, or a host of other secular ideologies and institutions. This new idolatry proves itself anything but benign in its use of force in the pursuit of justice. Whose religion indeed are we signed up for? Which violence are we really sanctioning? These are uncomfortable questions that lurk not far below our modern discontents and political narratives. And I'd like to invite you to respond to this with your neighbour for 5 minutes or so on this dangerous idea at a number of different levels. Religion itself is dangerous because it causes violence. Secondly, the privatisation of religion is dangerous because it removes the life of faith from the public sphere. How do you respond to that? Have a conversation, and then I want to move to a response. So off you go. Right, folks, we'll begin again. Can you hear me on through the mic? Okay. You can hear me. The last part of this talk is whither the praise of God. Whither the praise of God. Why is private religion bad news and good news? And I want to offer a number of related reasons why private religion is a dangerous idea and bad news and good news. First of all, the general topic is soul religion. Soul religion. Faith is quarantined in a holding room called soul reality. This is not unfamiliar to us. Religion and faith belong in the private sphere, not in the public sphere. This, of course, has a number of extremely attractive and distinct advantages, at least at first sight. First advantage of soul religion. First, it offers a protected space for the harassed and overwhelmed individuals of the Western world. Who doesn't like soul religion? This is a region where I can truly be alone with God, however I might conceive this God to be. There is no shortage of resources to infuse this soul space with meaning, strength and purpose. If you are in doubt, visit any bookstore. The self-help industry trades on this protected domain. It's an industry. It's worth a lot of money. Preachers play to it. The Word of God is fed into this region of the person and fills it up and strengthens it for surviving in the public space, a space of work, politics, business or whatever. Now, as you'll be doing in your workshops, I've noticed some of them, this is a very different thing from what I call the contemplative traditions, the mystical traditions of Christianity. In their best forms, they were the brother and sister of social engagement. That's a very different thing. It needs to be encouraged and grown. But this public perception of soul religion is dangerous. It offers all the protections, but all the disconnects the soul can want. Secondly, soul religion provides the basis for multiple religions, none of which can intrude into the public spaces of contemporary life. A veritable feast day. They can proliferate, yet remain sealed off from one another and the public and political domains of life. In this way, in a secular liberal democracy, religious pluralism can flourish within certain boundaries, that is, the private worlds of individuals and religious communities. No wonder we are struggling in Australia right now, because we don't know what to do with the proliferation in the public space of these this religious plurality we have. Cosmopolitan faith. And in principle, freedom of religion, operating in this particular way, is enshrined in section 116 of the Australian Constitution. It reads thus: "The Commonwealth shall not make any law for establishing any religion, or for imposing any religious observance, or for prohibiting the free exercise of any religion, and no religious test shall be required as a qualification for any office or public trust under the Commonwealth. Third advantage, apparent advantage. The privatisation of religion in the context of contemporary Western, what is called expressive individualism, means that the unending search for the sacred and the quest-type spiritual culture of the West has generated a veritable smorgasbord of competing spiritualities characterised as, by one sociologist, pick-and-mix religion. We're probably all caught up in this. This transcends traditional institutional forms of religion and national ethnic boundaries. It's truly global. You can craft your own religion. We might be able to speak of a truly cosmopolitan religious environment with multiple hybrid forms of spiritual offerings. Talk about life in abundance. This includes a shift from online religion to religion online. Religion online. It includes a focus on world religions with a global consciousness of a system of religions. This is all quite a recent development compared to an understanding of religion in terms of the ancient religious cultures. It seems that the gods and the deities of the ancient world have appeared in new and fresh forms and remain deeply attractive as elements of the spiritual quest. So, those three subpoints under the question of soul religion. Apparently attractive, but some very troubling aspects to it. I want to move to the problem of religious idolatry. The cordoning off of religion and faith into the private sphere provides the breeding grounds for the development of counter-religious ideologies for the purposes of retrieving the public sphere for religion. This may appear benign, but it is the breeding ground for fundamentalisms of various kinds. Religious fundamentalism, like most fundamentalisms, is a response to failure. It's easily forgotten. That hard line usually masks a sense of failure. We haven't quite made it. What's gone wrong? The world hasn't received us. You can trace this back to biblical traditions. I hesitate to say it because Dorothy's here, but the Johannine tradition has got a very powerful strain of this. What's gone wrong? It hasn't worked. If the world hated you, they'll hate me, they'll hate you. This kind of fundamentalist mindset gathers energy from the dualism inherent in the private-public dichotomy. This, in fact, is seen as the problem. Religion has been marginalised, sold out, the result of far too many compromises. What is required is a strong counter-movement, an assertive brand of religion that seeks influence in the public space. And often, how often, the ends seem to justify the means. In fact, the ends determine the means, they never justify the means. The brand of mission and evangelism associated with this kind of religious response to the privatisation of religion is easily identified. It generates an over-againstness type of faith. It trades on dualities. It feeds off a negative assessment of the world and consequently of creation. It has more in common with the general ethos of modernity that is deeply in that ancient heresy Manichaean. Manichaees, the world is a place to be delivered from, the world is a bad place, let's get out as quick as we can. Or while we're here, let's take it over. The world is a dangerous and evil place. The priority here is providing a means of escape into a protected soul space in eternal time. Moreover, the means by which this removal is effected is deeply infected with the habits of a consumerist business entertainment culture. In this sense, it is deeply another ancient heresy, Pelagian. Salvation becomes the new great work to be achieved with all the cunning and craft of the world. It is well documented in a remarkably insightful book called God is Back. If you just Google that, God is Back, it'll pop up. How the global rise of faith is changing the world. Frightening, but insightful. God is Back. So, from sole religion as a problem to religious idolatry, ideology. Thirdly, the privatisation of faith is bad news because it diminishes embodied faith. It evaporates embodied faith. I would say this private religion is bad news for the good news because it comes from a different stable than Christianity. The pun is quite intentional. It comes from a different stable. The stable of straw is such a key focus for an embodied, vulnerable and sacramental faith. Religion is soul faith. Private space is basically dualistic. Two worlds apart, false dichotomies, a truncated and disembodied religion. I want to say more about that over the next few days because it is critical for an authentic and holistic mission. You go back to the 5 marks of mission, and there's not much that's not in the public space there. There's not much soul religion in the way I've been talking about it there. And there's very little space for religious ideology, although all of these things can be distorted. The 5 marks of mission for the Anglican Communion are not about the privatisation of faith at all, but rather life in the public space. The Christian faith cannot be compartmentalised, quarantined, hermetically sealed off from the public space. It includes everything. Jesus was not crucified because he lived in a stable and in a carpenter's shop, but because he taught, argued, healed and debated, offended, challenged the powers that occupied the public spaces, most pointedly the temple. A sacramental faith is an embodied, concrete and public faith. Anything less makes a mockery of the incarnation of the Word. How the Church follows the mission of God in the public space, how it tells the good news in that space, these are the questions that ought to be at the forefront of our thinking, praying and engagement. So in conclusion, I want to propose to you that what is happening in the Australian context is the opening up of the public spaces again, the re-emergence of the notion of the public space, of civil society. There are new opportunities for a new moral and global ethic, in the words of Hans Kuhn, a new atmosphere which requires cooperative global ethos to address common issues. There is a time for a renewed interreligious dialogue and interreligious witness, no less. Yesterday at the Climate Justice Forum we had on campus at Trinity, Professor Neil Ormeron spoke about the Australian religious response to climate change. It's an interreligious dialogue, but more importantly, an interreligious witness about the values that we hold and cherish as human beings and the planet. This opening up of the public space which is occurring, sometimes it has to be prized open, but it has to be opened and occupied, if you like, in a Christian way, Christianly, and not driven by religious ideology. This will in turn, of course, require the churches of the one Church of God, to reconsider their ecumenical life together. As a matter of fact, in my own experience, where I'm working these days, I discover, first of all, perhaps 60-70% of my work is on the interreligious dialogue, interreligious front. And it's there that I discover not only commonalities with people across the faith traditions, but I rediscover my Christian brothers and sisters on a common journey to a horizon that is beyond the immediate concerns about how we're going to get together. The issue is the common common space for the common good, and a new wisdom. And this will be the genesis and the driving engine for new ecumenism. The Enlightenment settlement, not I hasten to add the separation of church and state as such, somewhat complicated, but the privatisation of religion is fast collapsing. It was a dangerous idea that has run its course, but its consequences are all over the course. The opening of the public space, in all its confusions and tensions, is in fact not simply a quirk of social and political history. It is that, but it is much more. Theologically, we are to discern these times as a new prizing open of the public space. If you like, a new crack in the fissure of modernity has opened up. And through this crack, the breath of the eternal Spirit might just be blown. The praise of God cannot be silenced, it cannot be diminished, nor can it be colonised by alien idolatries, at least not forever. The light shines in the darkness has never comprehended it or overcome it, let alone snuffed it out. Now, Anglicanism has a long history of engagement in the public space. A key person in the 19th century was F.D. Maurice. He hailed from the Broad Church. His abiding focus was God in society, a very public and incarnational faith. It got him into a lot of trouble on a few occasions. The Maurice tradition, the Broad Church tradition, which has plenty of space in its wings, has strong echoes in the Australian Anglican tradition. Perhaps one of the most significant was the former Bishop of Canberra and Goulburn, Ernst Bergman. Bergman came from the Manning Valley, north of Newcastle. There are photos of the young Bergman chopping trees down. Very earthy kind of character. He was an educationist, institutional builder, and prophetic voice for an enculturated and public Christianity. The Prime Minister of the day referred to him in Parliament as that meddlesome priest. I thought, what more could you ask for? Bergman believed that the public space was the church's mission space. The re-emergence of a public space where a fresh public discourse and public action in relation to the things that matter in life. And you can fill in the space here. The things that matter in life. What are the things that make for the common good in this country? What are the things that matter at this point in time? In the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture, we have 4 pillars, but one pillar is wisdom for civil society. And when I'm asked what's there, I said, the hot button issues of the day are there. The place of children in our society, the place of the refugee and the asylum seeker, the question of the planet, of welfare. Fill in the blanks. The things that matter. There is a fresh public discourse about the things that matter. And in proportion to the extent to which they are pushed down and squeezed and cordoned off, privatised and separated, there will be an inevitable re-emergence. You can take a handful of mud and you can squeeze it to hold onto it. And the more you squeeze it, the more it comes out. There is an inevitable re-emergence of the public space as a space for the true mission and the telling of the good news. It's a fresh space for mission, a fresh space for the creative rehearsing of an ancient wisdom in word and deed. This new public space for religion and faith is a contested and a fractious space. There's no cheap public space. There's no cheap praise. There's no cheap public space. The writer of Proverbs in chapter 8 says to a wonderful verse, Wisdom takes her stand at the crossroads. It's a lovely image. Wisdom taking her stand at the crossroads in the public spaces. This is where the new wisdom has to be crafted, has to be enacted, embodied and practiced. This is not an easy space, but it is a space where a fresh praise of God might arise. This is the new context. It is the new great challenge for mission and evangelism today. How might we rediscover a fresh, enculturated and authentic praise of God in this country as a response to the abundant life of God in the world? This, I think, is the great challenge. And in the next two addresses, I want to take that up and explore it a little bit more. First of all, in terms of God, I thought it would be good to talk about God. And so we'll do that tomorrow. And we'll just keep on talking about God after that. On Saturday, I want to look at the whole question of the mystery of the church and talk about slow church. So, thank you very much for your engagement today, and I hope you have a good cup of tea and enjoy the Bible study later on. See you later on.